know why we failed? Asked Claney. Of course we want to know. We have to know. It's simple. We failed because it can't be done. We couldn't do it, and neither can you. No human beings will ever cross the bright side alive, not if they try for centuries. Thus, Peter Claney, sole survivor of an attempt by 4 men to cross the sunward hemisphere of Mercury, tries to dissuade another explorer, James Barron, from leading a similar expedition to disaster. But Barron doesn't believe him. He's sure it can be done. And in order to put him off, Peter Claney feels obliged to break silence and tell his terrifying story. Welcome again, viewers, to Roll Off a Tangent. I'm Robert Gibson, alias Sendexor, and together with my teammates, Anthony Simeon, Nikki Zueff, and XJ, we'll be focusing on a classic tale from what I like to call the second golden age of SF, the 50s and early 60s. Brightside Crossing is a 19-page thriller by Alan Nourse, first published in Galaxy magazine in 1956, which fortunately was some years before scientists ruined one of the best planetary scenes in the science-fictional solar system by disproving the old idea of Mercury's sun-synchronous rotation. Here then we have the old-fashioned, dramatically two-faced version of Mercury, with its furnace-like permanent day side. Because the challenge is not only to cross the day side, but also to time the crossing so as to reach the subsolar point at perihelion, the men must keep a tight schedule. And that means that in addition to all the necessary caution involved in such a hellish journey, they must also be prepared to take risks in order to avoid delays. This balancing act turns out to be impossible. McIvers, the one readiest to take risks, protests Claney's caution. Mikuta, the leader, tries to keep the peace between the two. Youngster Jack Stone, meanwhile, battles his own fears. The fifth protagonist is the planet itself, described so that you sense the murderously red-hot terrain around you while you're reading. I've enjoyed this gem many times in the course of my long life, but it's only recently that I've got round to objective consideration of the issues it raises concerning the characters' motivations. That, to me, is the mark of a great story. It bamboozles you into seeing its events through the blinkered eyes of the protagonists. At this stage, I won't reveal the ironic brilliance of the ending, but will hand over to my colleagues for their comments. Comrade Zueff, would you like to kick off?
Thank you very much for passing the torch to me. Well, there's a lot to talk about regarding this story. I mean, you've mentioned a lot of these things in your intro there, Robert. First of all, the way our world has changed and how we now understand the planet is definitely different than what was thought of in that age, right? And so for that, it has this sort of rustic charm, propelling an old theory of science as if it was real. Um, it reminded me of the immeasurable horror, but instead of going into the expedition and making it like, we are in the jungles of the unknown, and there's all these, predators and so on and so forth. It was more like we're climbing the Everest, and we're not really ready. I'm also not sure regarding um, the conviction of the main protagonist that they needed MacGyver so that they could be on time. I mean, like a clock would suffice. But I get the idea that like you need some sort of a daredevil in such situations. Just seemed a little bit forced because, in all honesty, MacGyver got everyone killed, right? Except for the guy who's telling us the tale. So it's like him claiming it, yeah, we really needed him, kind of sounded a little bit inauthentic, which surprised me a lot because the remainder of characterization for the protagonist and also the individuals in the tale is pretty solid, even if sparse. The story is itself small, so for what it's got, it's a pretty good depiction of human interaction, which was a nice surprise. Yeah, I wouldn't exactly say that it's a great story, like a something that would have to go in my top 100 or something, or let's say maybe top 50. But um, I don't know, it's charming. Special shout out to the fact that the poorer suits for the astronauts are made out of asbestos. That's pretty awful, you know. And obviously, I think during those times they also didn't know how horrible asbestos is to your health. But I'm not sure actually. I have no idea. Um, it was just very funny to me. When he was like, "Oh yeah, not that crappy asbestos other people use." So, like, well, thank God not, because you'd probably have like 20 minutes to live after inhaling all that.
Mm.
Yeah. Um, For what it's worth, I think it's a charming little story, but that's kind of its niche.
Mm.
Yeah, that's what I think. What about you, Anthony? What do you think about the story?
Yeah, you said charming. The word that came to mind was for me was quaint. So it
Quaint.
was very quaint. It was I like retrofuturism. But this isn't retrofuturism. Now it is, but at one time this was cutting edge science and science fiction. I pictured being a kid, like a young boy, like maybe 10 years old or something, reading this story in the 50s, and thinking that oh wow, Mercury doesn't rotate and it has an eternal bright side, and asbestos, this modern technology of asbestos protecting them from the heat. Wow, miraculous. So just that anachronistic quality to it was very quaint, and it was very comforting. This was like fiction or sci-fi comfort food for me, sort of, as when I was reading it. So it's like, oh, that's adorable. Look what they used to believe, as this, reading it as a person, as a cynical older adult or whatever, not necessarily cynical, but more world weary adult. I was trying to find, more interest in the story or more excitement, wishing I was that little kid in the 50s reading like an astounding stories magazine or whatever, this appeared in something like a pulp magazine, reading it, waiting for like to go out and ride bikes with my friends for the rest of the day on a weekend day, So it was that comforting in that way. But again, I think I agree with you, Nikki. It wasn't exactly like it didn't blow my socks off like with originality. It was sort of like a boilerplate, story about like you said, climbing Everest or something. It's already been done, been there, done that. We're kind of beyond all that age of discovery sort of thing. So it was like that whole part of it was like, the excitement was kind of lost on me. But I'm not that little boy in the 50s on my bed, golly gee, reading the story and experiencing all these concepts for the first time. So it was like, I'm reading it, I was like, oh man, I feel like I should be more excited about this, Uh, but it was sort of like an old west in space sort of thing as well, which again has been kind of done. So, but it's again trying to put myself in the mindset of the person reading it, or the kid, or whoever, a young person, or even an adult back then reading it. Yeah, I think that it was fairly well done writing style wise. I would almost say it's workmanlike, but again, it was kind of doing a job, almost like ironically, like the people in the story itself were going on this adventure, but it didn't seem like it was written in a very thrilling way, and it was very kind of got down into the technical nitty gritty of like their suits, and like there was some drama with their like, oh, they're starting to feel the heat and everything, but it was it's like, okay, I get it. And then
I think
obviously the twist. What's that?
I think I would just want to say I think the fact that this is the only survivor, like, and it said right at the beginning,
Yeah.
and he's telling it kind of evaporates any sort of tension. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, I
yeah.
think those parts were written more or less okay. Sorry, what were you saying?
Yeah, no, that's the point. It was like I was like, okay, you kind of know that one guy survives at least, and it was like, okay, well, but then at the end, that it's kind of came together, and it was like, okay, the end kind of wrapped things up, and I don't want to spoil it, but like Robert was saying, but it's just like, okay, well, all right. So it just seemed like it was like this story for to impress young people back in the day with like, hey, this is space science, and hey, this is like a rugged individual, he goes, and there's this disastrous thing that he was on, this adventure, this expedition, and so it seemed like a story from another time. It was very comforting and quaint in its own way, but I wasn't necessarily blown away by the meaning per
Not your
se.
thing.
Yeah, but I enjoyed it, but maybe mildly so. So, XJ, what about you?
Oh, I really like the story. Actually, I think it's great. So first of all, the structure of the story I think is very is a well tread over structure. It calls to mind, as some of you have as both of you had said, climbing Mount Everest. Although, actually, the thing that is going through my mind when I was reading this story is crossing the Arctic region. I think that it's a lot closer to, because there are a lot of expeditions back in the day from. I think the British, they sent people out to cross the Arctic to explore and all that. And I think that the structure of the story is basically pulled from that line of actual events, and you can see a lot of the same kind of setting. You have a crew, and then they go in, somebody screwed up, and then what are the environmental disasters and stuff like that. What really captured me is that, well, it's like, what if the thing that we're crossing is not a tundra, wasteland made of ice? What if it is so hot that everything's melting around you? And I think like all of the detailed work, which at that time nobody knows for sure what's going on the surface of Mercury, right? I think all of that detailed description that went into all that is very, very imaginative. It's clear that the guy, Alan Nourse, had actually sat down and really thought about what would it be like. In some sense, it's not all that different from an Arctic crossing, because you still have unstable ground, you have melting ice caps and stuff like that, right? There's like rivers of this, that, and the other, but it's the feeling of freezing, changing to just like so hot that if you just lose your suit, you get vaporized immediately. I thought that was very well conveyed, and I really like the image Alan Nourse is painting in my mind about molten rivers of zinc and lava and whatnot. It's throughout the whole story, it just painted a really evocative and hellish landscape in my mind. What I also really like about the story actually is the beginning paragraph, because in the beginning paragraph, like the starting paragraph, you get a really solid sense of who James Barron is as a person. And it's not told to you. It's just like in the way he carries himself, in the way he answers other people. It's like he's like a no nonsense guy. I don't want you to bother me. Now go away, kind of person. He's got things to do, man.
Places to be.
My time is money, so don't come and bug me. So buzz off. you know, that kind of feeling. And I think like for all of the characters inside the story, their characteristics are taught through that way, and I think that's brilliant. I think it's much better than like you get a sense of MacGyver's rashness, not really through uh, a monologue or internal monologue or somebody saying this guy is rash. You just get the sense of who MacGyver is on the day of the expedition. He was late, and then he just strode into the scene and said, yeah, you know, something happened, and then I found a way around it. And then you totally get a sense of what kind of character he is, because he is, and you know that he's the kind that improvises, not too good with rules and schedules, bit of a daredevil, kind of want to do his own thing, you know. And you get a sense of all of the characters just through storytelling, not through exposition, which I really appreciate. Not that I have anything against tell and not show, but sometimes I do quite appreciate show and not tell. Yeah. I quite like this story. I quite like this story. The structure itself, the plot of the story is not very original, but I'll give it high points on delivery. Well, not delivery, but the way Alan Nourse painted his characters, and I really like the landscape itself. I wouldn't say Mercury was the protagonist. I would say Mercury is perhaps the antagonist. But yeah, I really like the way Mercury is portrayed as well, the landscape. Yeah. Right.
It is masterfully done, I'll say.
Yeah. Back over to you, Rob. Tell us.
Yeah, you mentioning early on the structure of the story, XJ, it reminds me that it's a bit the same structure as A Martian Odyssey by Stanley Weinbaum, only, of course, the actual planet is totally different. But again, you have the report. Most of the story is in the form of a report by someone who's been on a journey, and his narration of what happened to him is interrupted now and again by the person he's reporting to. And it seems quite an effective way of telling a story, in a way, a sort of conducive to being in one's comfort zone, and that you know that the person did get back safely to tell his story, even if no one else did. Regarding what Nikki said about did they really need MacGyver's, because a clock would have done. Well, a clock would have shown them that they were failing to They wouldn't have. It wouldn't have done anything to make them beat that clock. And perhaps, as Claney said at the beginning, it was impossible. But if it at all was possible, then the idea is you'd need someone who could take risks. I personally think that the thrust of the story is that it can't be done. But anyway, that version of Mercury doesn't exist, so it's an academic question. Unfortunately, it doesn't exist. It's one of the big disappointments in my life that there isn't that real two-faced Mercury. As Anthony says, it's a sort of book that a sort of story a little boy would be enthralled by. I've remained a little boy all my life, so that's why I'm going to give it 10 out of 10.
Already?
Yes, yes.
It hasn't been like more than 20 minutes of us recording.
Well, it's really unnecessary for me to make that point anyway. You all know me well enough. I think the one point I tried to make in my introduction, which was very late in my readings of the story, I realized that it has some profound things to say about motivation, because we think of it as a story of exploration, but actually it's more just an attempt at a stunt. To look at it bleakly, these people they have some compulsion to seek glory by doing almost impossible things. And maybe one of the byproducts of that activity, in fact, it's likely that the byproduct will be useful exploration of the terrain concerned. But exploration, that is to say, finding out what's there, is not their motivation at all. They just want to pit themselves against a challenge. And that is something which it took me a long time, a very long time, to spot. I used to think of it just as a story of heroic exploration. It might be heroic in a way, but it's not something that a fully sane and balanced person would give his life trying to do, in my opinion. I don't know about something like Captain Scott's doomed expedition to the South Pole. I don't know enough about the chap to know what his motivation was, but the race to the pole sounds like, if it's a race, then it sounds like you're not serious about exploring, because if you were, then it wouldn't really matter who got to the pole first. It's what you discover while you're trying to get there that counts. So that's my belated take on the motivations of the characters, but it doesn't really matter from the point of view of enjoying the story. It's something to accept in its own terms, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it seemed like, just like XJ mentioned earlier, the travel across the Arctic, the South Pole, wherever, was it really for when people were trying to strive to get to the poles? Was it really about the discovery? No, it was about being the first person to get there. So it was sort of the fame, the fortune, the notoriety. Your name would obviously go down in history. So it's a bit of chasing immortality that human beings often do. We chase ridiculous goals and dangerous goals, you know, sometimes just for the notoriety, and we'll dress it up with, oh, it's about discovery and exploration. But really, it's about, you'll always remember who was the first guy to actually make it somewhere, right? So to me, it was, again, this story of like this rugged individual, who was a daredevil, and they need him to be the guy, to take, even though he maybe failed, at least he has the daring and the gumption to do it. And he, so it's, and thus the reason why eventually you find out that he wants to do it again, despite all the protests, right? But, despite his protestations about how no one will ever do it, I'm sure we all know he wants to try again because of that, the pull of, the notoriety and the fame and the renown that he'll get from being the first to cross the bright side. So, yeah, that's the folly of it, just for the sake of renown.
Well, there is that, and there is also the feeling of having conquered something. I think like every mountain climber will have that feeling, but at the same time, like the process of doing that kind of stuff, a lot of benefits are born from that. Look at the space race, I would say. That was one of the most technologically innovative period in American history, I would say, when they were competing with the Russians to get to the moon first.
No. It was to space first, and then they changed it to the moon because they lost.
Fair enough.
Because Yuri Gagarin got to space, and they're like, no, well, actually, you know what? We're actually chasing to get to the moon, guys.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. But like lots of technology was born from that. And I could see the same thing happening for, I don't know, the first to stake a claim on Mars or something like that. You know, like a lot of technology could be born from that, like how you would set up a environment in like a hostile planet, and you know, farming techniques, which brought to mind this news article I saw about how the Chinese are using AI to control lighting for indoor vertical farming, which is, well, you know, on Earth there's literally no use for it, but on a colony that would be where you'll find some use. So I think it's not
Yeah.
just about personal glory and fame, although there is that, of course. There are a lot of spin-off benefits that could be derived from that endeavor. Yeah,
Yeah,
this is just my
I mean,
thing.
technology-wise, yeah, that's true. Although, I mean, you would probably never be able to terraform Mercury. I don't know, but I mean,
Hey,
versus Mars, I don't know. You never know.
but being able to improve suits to withstand
Right.
higher temperature, better
Right.
survival, being able to survive longer on harsh environments. I think all of that will have spin-offs.
Sure, but unfortunately, how many people have to die, in the extreme environment? I don't know. It's
Well,
like,
these
well, we know
guys are
that
volunteers.
right.
Just saying.
Well, we know that they didn't have enough. We need more asbestos for next time, guys.
Yes, yeah.
They didn't have enough asbestos on.
who knew 300 years ago that oil was going to be such an important resource that you'd have to pump? Nobody. Perhaps right now there's something on Mercury that we just think like, whatever, we don't need that. And then like in 100 years, we'll be like, all of our technology relies on, I don't know, zinc in order to exist.
Spice.
Yeah, the spice.
The spice must flow.
The trouble is that opportunities for the kind of exploration that the classical type where you try and see what's over the next hill, is opportunities are very rare. They're not only rare on Earth, but thanks to surveys by space probes, they're going to be rare in the entire solar system, probably already are, because supposing we discovered a way to get to these planets easily, they've all been imaged and mapped from orbit now. So, what is there to do? I suppose you could go out into the Oort cloud and find some unexpected comets here and there, but the way we've done it, we've chosen to send out probes rather than send out people, and that's disappointing from the adventure point of view.
But it's
Well-
much safer.
Well, there are a lot of technical barriers, shall we say, to sending people.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Not only is it well, despite all of our romantic aspirations in science fiction literature, the truth is nothing travels faster than light. So we've got some pretty big barriers to sending people to actually explore. So drones it is.
Yeah,
Well, never say never,
yeah.
True, we just need to find a place with sandworms, right? And then we have navigators who can help us navigate through space and set up
Have
a
you
space
seen Dune Part 2? Is this why you're just like
Yes, I have.
referencing that?
That's why I've keep.
Yeah.
You read my mind, Nikki.
I'm like- I was like, there's got to be some point to all these Dune references. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I read the book. I like Dune. It's pretty good. The first book. The rest of them are just like, okay, no more cocaine for you, sir. Please stop. And then he doesn't stop. He's like, no. Let me mix in some LSD with this stuff. Like I'm just gonna tell you everything that's going through my mind. I'm like, everything? We really need to read that? Like he's like, everything. Okay. All right, man. Wait, in 500 years he's a worm now? Oh right. Put down the pen, dude. So back to Brightside Crossing. I really like the name. I wanted to talk about the name. Brightside Crossing. It's punchy, even though it's a complicated set of words. Just when you say it, it feels good to say it. Yeah, there's something very essential to the title of a story being, something that would grab your eye or make you at least wonder, what does that mean? When I was younger, I used to call my short stories all by a single word because I thought that would catch your eye. So, one of them was called The Villain, or the other one was called, The Stars, and so on and so forth. And
Those
I
are
thought
two
I'm so
words.
fucking cool.
2 words.
That is
I'm
Well,
surprised you used the word the. I thought that
I'm
was-
using the word the because I'm speaking to people who are using the inferior language called English. In Russian, it would just be called zlodей or звезда, and that's one word. Uneducated Robert. Well, no, I mean, don't you know Russian? We don't have thes.
I know. That's why I'm teasing you.
I see. Well, yeah. So, anyways, what was I saying? I forgot it in my desire for vengeance. Yes. So, Brightside Crossing as a title is really strong. I was disappointed with one thing, and that there wasn't a twist, not in the story, but the twist in the story of the main protagonist telling the tale. So I like the twist at the end of the whole story that he says, I want to come with you. But I also would have liked some sort of a twist there at the end in his retelling of what happened. I felt that could have elevated this story a little bit more. Because I agree with XJ on many points that he's made, including the fact that this is a pretty cliche setup as far as we're concerned. And I think just like, you go to a chippy, so like where you could get some fish and chips in England. And when the haddock and the chips cost £6, which is around $8, it's not going to be the greatest. But you're also paying for it only $8/£6, so you're pretty happy about it. But if you go to a restaurant and they have exactly the same dish, but it costs more, you would expect that there would be some sort of an elevation of the dish. It would be not reinvented, but at least cooked to perfection. And so I think if you're going with that sort of a setup, you really have to just add a little bit of something to make it worth your while, or you have to just execute it perfectly. And unfortunately for me, the story isn't as perfect as it wants to be, and it doesn't have this little sprinkled in spice, this little bit of salt.
So, what is it that you think is missing from the story, like the adventure itself? Because that's what I'm hearing. Like you think there should be more in the crossing itself.
Yes, I wanted. So I think there's two missed opportunities. Number one, making the Brightside Crossing not just impossible because of the landscape, but of something else, something interesting. And what you can do in the stories that pretend to be realistic, like this one is trying to, right? It's trying to portray like this is a realistic future where this is happening, right? There's no aliens or anything like that. You could have it that people started to hallucinate and see things that weren't there. and our the teller of the tale, he could be something along the lines of I still see the after images, and I know I've spoken to many doctors, many shrinks, psychologists, physicians. It's impossible that anything that I heard could be real, but I still can't convince myself it wasn't. I could hear the man screaming and asking me to return and try and get them, or something like that. Because that happens in the Arctic too. You start getting crazy ideas in your head. Right? So it would be very authentic to the story.
I did think that the author could have went in a little bit more about dehydration and heat stroke even through their suits to properly convey just how harsh Mercury's bright side is. Although I
Yeah,
was a li-
yeah, yeah.
I was also feeling a little bit. I mean, I'm just agreeing with Nikki here. I'm also just I was also thinking it would be cool to see a bit of that weirdness, except I wasn't sure if this would change the tone of the story into something like Solaris, or I'm not sure if that would have been a great direction to take it, because the story itself is pretty well crafted. I wouldn't say it's genius, but it is definitely, I wouldn't call it groundbreaking like Solaris is, but I would characterize it as being very well put together, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
it didn't have a lot of tension. I feel like it could have had more tension
But I
to it.
think,
Yeah,
but
that could have been.
I think one thing that definitely is missing though is lava worms. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Need more lava worms. Something. Yeah,
Did you
something
use the word
unexpected.
XJ? Did you use the word cool when you were?
Hot.
If so, I think it's highly inappropriate.
Okay,
So,
well, yeah.
Well,
It'd be very hot if he did that.
yeah.
Somehow that's worse. I don't know. um,
yeah.
yeah, no, I think that it was just it didn't have a lot of tension. I think there maybe was even an opportunity to tell a story that cast into doubt what they were talking about, or the fact that the character that he's talking to was even on the expedition. Like maybe it could have been revealed later in the story that he's actually describing an expedition that he was on, that he survived and failed. Maybe he could have been. Maybe you could have established or not established that he was on it in the beginning. Maybe make it more nebulous as to, because he's a guy. The character that he's talking to that's relaying the story is someone who's been on a lot of adventures, right? He's sort of famous for being a daring space explorer. It seemed like to me. So it's like maybe he's heard tell of a failed expedition, and by the way, he was on it. Maybe you find that out later in the story. I don't know, something like a twist like that. I think
I mean,
would even be possible.
one thing that just occurred to me is that the author could have done something with the body that they found along the way, because they did find the previous expedition when they were crossing. Yeah.
Yep.
And
for sure.
that particular moment in that particular moment they could have examined the body and find something odd about it, not just dying from exposure or something like that. I thought that
Like
was
he's been stabbed with a knife or
yeah.
something. Yeah.
It just occurred to me that could have been something that the author could do something with.
I won't tell you that this proposition will make the story better, but if I was writing it, I would keep it, like I'd keep basically most of the things the same, maybe add the whole like thing of hallucinations a little bit. But then I would change the ending to when, like, I would extend it, and I would have the guy say like, oh, I want to go with you, and that's when the dude that's been talking to him, he says like, that's enough, like end projection, and the dude isn't there, he's actually also dead. They found pieces of his body, some parts of his brain, and in order to reconstruct the scene, like basically in the future, it would be like
Haven't we
you have to
haven't
get
we read
yeah.
that story before? I feel as if we
Mm.
had. Like quite
It's
literally,
not.
one of the stories
Yes.
that Robert suggested.
Yeah, that's right. One of the that's right. What I'm trying to say is, I think any twist would do.
Okay, fair enough.
But
so to you,
actually, I really like Reconstructor. That's why I chose it as an example.
so to you, the story was told too straight, basically.
Mhm.
It was too straight, and unlike you, I don't believe it's perfect, right? So if the
Well,
execution in my
no,
head
that is Robert. I don't.
was maybe the word perfect is a word you don't like. You find it very well written with very few
Yes.
flaws, whereas you just made me say more words. You could have just accepted perfect.
No,
So
I want to make
Well,
you say
that's-
more words to pat
well,
the length.
you know-
to pat the length.
yeah, I was gonna say that makes sense. Yes, there you go. So I do not find it the way you do in that sentiment, and therefore I think, just like in my analogy, the dish had to be elevated. You had to do a little bit something with this cliche story of a survivor.
Yeah. But again, it's, again, it's almost like you have to do some work as a reader, and you have to be, you have to be a fan of the older style pulp stories, and you kind of have to do some work and put yourself in the place of that. Again, I go back to the vision I had of, I really felt like I need to really enjoy the story and give it a perfect 10, either a kid at heart, like Robert professes to be, and I don't doubt it, or he's probably less cynical maybe than I am, or I don't know, or at least when it comes to stories, and you can maybe separate yourself from your current time period and project yourself back, maybe Robert, more easily than I can, to that mentality. It was more work for me, I guess, to try to say, okay, I gotta suspend my disbelief and be a little less cynical and a little less modern and strip away all that I know. So it's like when you're reading these old stories, you really kind of need to, it's like sort of an art form to read them and appreciate them in that time capsule, sort of. So I was like, maybe that's what I'm experiencing. Maybe that's what Nikki sort of experienced, was like, okay, this is pretty much just a straightforward adventure tale, that, a kid from back in the day would read and find thrilling, but I don't. So it's like, and again, that doesn't take away from the story, but stripping that away, the time and place it was written and the naivete of it a little bit, and the retro futurism of it that we see now, but the debunked science, as it were, or the learned science and the whatever, now we know more. It was like, yes, it wasn't as thrilling. I mean, and I know I'm a horror fan primarily, but if you compare like an Antarctic story, like at the Mountains of Madness, where you have the exploration part of it, but you also have the mystery of what's happening that's supernatural, sort of like, but also there's a story like that, like who goes there, the inspiration for it. That was exploration of the Arctic, but also with the added mystery of discovering this life form. So that was a science fiction. So it's, if you added something into this story that was a mystery, a little more something to it, a little more of a twist to it, rather than just being a straight golly gee exploration story from the age of, like, the pulps. Like, that's what it seemed, just too quaint to like grip me, and I know I'm just not the audience for it, really, so and I can't suspend my consciousness enough to like go back and say, oh, this is, whoa, golly gee, I wish I was there, where it was like I could be inspired by a story of exploration and daring do, and but again, like, look at how we're just seeing it as just like, well, they're doing this for just the renown.
To be fair though, if I read the Mountain of Madness, I wouldn't want to get anywhere close.
No, totally, yeah. So yeah, right. So what's the point? If anyone reading this story, are you supposed to go, gee, it sounds dangerous, but I would sure sure love to kind of try that, even though might be boiled alive in my suit. I don't know.
Mm.
So yeah, it's I'm very ambivalent about the story.
To be honest, I do have a special thing about the planet Mercury. In fact, I wrote a novel, Valedom, based on trying to justify the original sun-synchronous Mercury. And the excuse I make of insisting on that version is that there is a force that was awakened on that planet which is trying to hide its true nature. In fact, trying to make all our worlds more boring, which is why the solar system.
That sounds properly villainous.
Yeah,
my goal is to make everyone's life boring. I like that. Very, very Disney and very spine chilling at the same time.
And I have it as affecting Earth as well. Anyway, I'm a great fan of the traditional Mercury, and also it's got such potential for its twilight belt, which wasn't explored in this story. Actually, although the twilight belt is now relegated to legend, we do have in real life twilight poles of Mercury, in that because the planet has zero axial tilt, there is a North Pole and a South Pole region where the sun is neither up in the sky nor below the horizon, but just on the horizon. So that ought to be a fascinating place, or two fascinating places. You could invent scenarios of living beings, perhaps at either pole. Anyway, that's another matter. That's a separate issue.
All right. Seems like we have came to a natural stop. Any last words about this? Short story, Brightside Crossing.
There actually, the title reminded me of, there was a novel written a few years ago called The Whitefire Crossing and I never read it, but I read the blurb on the back and I read a little about the author. She actually is a mountain climber, like a professional mountain climber. And it's a fantasy novel. So she took her expertise in mountain climbing and applied it to like an adventure story of like about a couple people, like a professional mountain climber in a fantasy setting, leading someone over an expedition over a mountain, and it was called Whitefire Crossing. So that was a cool title.
Fun. That ought to be fun.
Yeah. So, and I never read it. I don't know. Yeah, the Whitefire Crossing. So yeah, it kind of, I was like, oh, I've heard something similar to this, and it was like, so the mountains are called the Whitefire Mountains. So that's why it was called the Whitefire Crossing. So yeah, so I might have to go back and look that up. But yeah, it's very dramatic title, just like this one, Brightside Crossing. So anyway, final point.
All right. Anyone else?
I just want to say my score. It's a solid 7 out of 10. I enjoyed the story. I just wish it was more than it is.
Oh, yeah, sure. Could always do with some lava worms, am I right?
Yeah.
That's one of the things that could improve.
Look at how enthusiastically you are agreeing with me, Nikki. I'm so flattered. Anthony?
Salamanders.
I might give it I was thinking I was going to give it a 6.5 out of 10. I want to reserve some of those higher scores for other stories that I feel like I really enjoy. This was just sort of comfort food. It really wasn't, again, going back to the food analogy. It was just some fish and chips you can get off the street from a cart versus going to a restaurant. Now listen, street food can also be good and filling and wholesome, and actually can be quite delicious.
Wholesome?
Don't knock it, right?
You gotta be kidding me.
Well, okay. Maybe not as wholesome, but it can still warm the soul. And this was very soul warming, but it was like, it was just kind of comfort food. I want to be excited sometimes, by my reading, as such as it is. So I would say I would probably go with 6.5. Didn't knock my socks off. Solid workmanship. Obviously, a story from back in the pulpy kind of golden age days. So we probably couldn't do without it. Probably laid some good foundations, or and entertained many a young boy and girl who were reading science fiction back in the day. But for me, I don't know, it didn't quite do it. But I can see the importance of a tale like that and the history of science fiction. So I think I appreciate it more that way than an actual tale that excited me.
We already know Robert's score, which is 10 out of 10. So I will give my score, which I will give it as 8.8. Very close to 9. I really like the story just for the length of it. I do wish there was a bit more, just like Nikki said. And that's why my score is not quite 9. I think it would, now that I have thought about it, I would really like there to have been an extended portion where the explorers investigated a little bit more of the people who died, the bodies of the people who died, when they were doing their crossing. Now that would have been would have made the story more interesting to me and would have pushed the score to 9. All right, and with that, Brightside Crossing by Alan Nourse. Pretty good story in my opinion. Perfect story in Rob's opinion. Comfort food level for Anthony. And just all right for Nikki.
So it is.
Right.
All right,
Sounds
guys.
all right.
If our listeners had liked this podcast, enjoyed this podcast, please like and subscribe. Help us grow the channel a little bit. And with that, we bid you farewell.
Thank you for watching.